Hello and welcome to Champaign County Agriculture Today. My name is Dennis Riggs, your host for this program, and we're glad you tuned in, and this is going to be a great program today. You've heard all the buzz, you've heard all the excitement about ethanol fuels, about biofuels, you've talked about energy conservation. Today we're going to talk with some experts about how agriculture can be a part of being the solution to our energy problems here, not only in East Central Illinois, but hopefully across our nation. Today we're going to talk about alternative energy and specifically ethanol. Our guest for today, a great panel of experts out here today. We have Jill Parnell from the Illinois Corn Growers Association. And Jill, I'm just going to start out with you, give an introduction of your background, where you live and what you do.
Okay, I am the District 6 Director of the Illinois Corn Growers, and I farm with my father just south of Mahomet. And I went to Southern Illinois University in Carbondale, got my bachelor's degree in ag mechanization, and came home to farm.
And you grow corn, right?
Yes.
All right, very good. Well, glad to have you with us today. Next, from the University of Illinois, the Assistant Dean for Research at the College of ACES, Dr. Hans Blashek. And Hans, we're glad to have you here today. Give us a little background of where you're from and the work you do at the university.
Sure. Well, my background is as a microbiologist, and we've been focused over the last 20 or so years on alternative fuels, and it turns out that this is an area that's particularly timely these days, so we're particularly busy as well.
Great doing research right here in the Corn Belt, and
right.
a lot of possibilities there.
Yeah.
Lastly on our panel is Jim Goss. Jim is a consumer of ethanol fuels here in East Central Illinois. Jim, give us a little bit of your background and why you're a good person to be talking about ethanol today.
Well, Dennis, my wife and family and I live out in Mahomet. I have a 2005 Chevy Tahoe that's an E85 compatible vehicle. I work for a real estate company here in town, and we chose that vehicle as a fleet vehicle to start to use E85 and alternative fuels.
Very good. Okay, well, as we can see today, we have a great panel here of a lot of different diversity of opinion as far as the ethanol industry. And we're going to go to slide number 4 to get started here off today, because as folks are sitting out there watching this program, they've heard of ethanol, they've thought a little bit about it, and what we have is a slide that maybe people have seen on the bumper stickers of different vehicles, and it says, "Cleaner air for Illinois, 10% ethanol." This is a fuel that's been around for a long time. Jim, you've been burning this fuel in your automobile. Have you seen stickers such as this, and how do you know when you're buying 10% ethanol and putting it in your vehicle?
Well, usually, Dennis, I mean, you see it right on the pump is where you see that. I travel the rural areas and up and down the interstates, and I'm a frequent user of Casey's gasoline, and I see that all the time at Casey's. They're a big proponent of 10% ethanol blend. But you see it at most gas stations. It's clearly marked on the pump.
Well, now that we've seen the sticker and people have seen it out there, we're going to talk to Hans and ask him, we need to figure out what exactly is ethanol fuel. Is there a specific definition? Are there different levels of ethanol? Give us your definition of what ethanol is.
Well, ethanol is an alcohol. It is actually an alcohol that has been produced for a long time. I mean, you can look back in history and see that fermentations were going on at the time of the Egyptians, and there's historical evidence to suggest that fermentation has been around for a long time. Of course, there's a bit of a difference between alcohol that's produced for consumption as opposed to alcohol that is used to say, burn in your car. But essentially, it's the same chemical.
We have seen maybe some misconceptions personified of the old stills down in Kentucky, the moonshine runners, and how if they were running a little bit short of fuel in their vehicle, they'd just take one of the jugs out of the back and pour it in the vehicle. That was more for human consumption. How is that different from what we're putting in our tanks at the gas station?
Well, the ethanol that is produced, say, by ADM and others actually is denatured so that, you can't really consume it. The denaturing process just simply involves adding a little bit of gasoline or some other product so that it is not fit for human consumption. But otherwise, it's essentially the same chemical.
Okay. Jill, we're going to turn to you next. Ethanol is something that the agricultural industry is excited about because it allows us to provide a product that's in high demand. Jill, I know you work with the Illinois Corn Growers Association. As a matter of fact, we're going to go to slide number 1 here while you're talking. Tell us about the corn growers and why are they excited about ethanol fuels?
Well, we're very excited because it adds a value to corn. So not only is that good for consumers, it's very good for our farmers. And we are working to promote usage of ethanol and what it can do for consumers.
The slide showed 2 websites. One was illinoiscorn.org. What would people find if they go to that website?
It's a very good website for consumers. We're trying to have it not only for farmers but also for the local consumer. It's got different links to different ethanol websites that will tell you what vehicles can run on E85, what pumps are around so that you can fill up your E85 vehicle, and just basic facts about ethanol in case you're interested in learning more.
The other website that was talked about was E85fuel.com. Kind of a similar thing, but is there something different with that website?
That's the NEVC website, the National Ethanol Vehicle Coalition. That is focused directly on E85, and that's where our website will send you for any specific questions on E85. So they're more national, so that you can get, if you're going to travel across country, you can go to that website, not only for Illinois, but for any state.
Very good. Well, we've already drawn a line. Here's a possible misunderstanding that people may have. And Hans, I'm going to turn to you. We've already seen 2 things there, a 10% blend and an 85%. Hans, could you tell us what the difference is, other than the obvious fact it's the percentage? Why should consumers be concerned about those 2 different types of ethanol fuel?
Well, you have to sort of go back and see why ethanol was added to begin with. Principally at the 10% level, we're talking about using it as an oxygenate, so that having that extra oxygen in there actually allows the fuel to burn more cleanly. In the quote old days, what was added was something called MTBE, which is the initials for a rather long chemical compound. But with the sort of reluctance to use that particular oxygenate, particularly since it caused some issues with groundwater contamination, there really has been a redirection toward using something like ethanol, which we know is a chemical that has properties which, just make it a little bit more amenable as an oxygenate. On the other hand, the E85 story is that, yes, you're right, you're adding 85% as opposed to 10%. And of course, you're going to see some differences as you move away from, gasoline, say, to an E85. There could be some issues relative to some performance issues. There could be small sort of other issues such as you might need to fill your tank just a little bit more frequently, that sort of thing. But overall, I mean, if you're thinking about renewable, if you're thinking about sort of the long term and the positive aspects, because obviously no fuel is perfect, but if you're thinking about the impact that using this fuel can have on the local economy, then I think it's kind of an easy decision which way to go.
So what you're saying is, in addition to the mechanical side of it, there's also a philosophical, and quite frankly, as we see in today's news every day, more of a world security reason. We
Sure.
are an energy consumer here in the United States, and to be irresponsible about where our energy comes from is not a long-term plan. Well, Jim, I'm going to turn to you for just a second, and we're going to pop up slide number 3 here that shows a gas cap that is a different color. You as a consumer, and you're out there, and your vehicle, how do you know that it's capable of burning what fuel?
Well, we specifically bought our vehicle that way, and we weren't fortunate enough to have the yellow cap yet, but now the yellow caps are there. On the inside of every fuel door, it's specifically marked. On every E85 pump, there are all kinds of warning signs. The fuel handle is actually yellow to match up to the yellow cap. There's a lot of precautions that are available. I mean, you could certainly still put it in your vehicle and not be right, but I mean, I think they've done everything they can to alert you to not make a mistake.
Give me some real world experience, Jim. If you're traveling across the state and you get to a place where you can't find a 10% blend or whatever, can you tell any difference in performance in your vehicle switching from a regular unleaded fuel to a 10% blend?
I mean, I really don't notice any difference in a 10% blend. I typically think that burns just the same. When we go to the E85, I've done a lot of testing with it, and I seem to lose about 2 to 2.5 gallons or miles per gallon. So, it's not a significant loss. Performance-wise of the vehicle, I notice no difference. I couldn't tell you whether I have E85 burning or 10% or regular unleaded fuel. It does not react or act any differently.
Okay, well, thank you. We appreciate that, because a lot of us that haven't had experience, especially with the E85 fuels, don't know what to expect. So that's good to have your input on that, Jim. And of course, as of this program, there's a lot of dynamics that are changing out there in the area of ethanol. Jill, I'm going to ask you, as far as the future, why is it such a big topic for Champaign or East Central Illinois farmers as well as consumers here in the area? Why is this ethanol seems like it's catching on, and it's kind of the buzz phrase on almost every newscast now?
Well, I think the main reason is that we sit right in the middle of the Corn Belt. We have the product to make the fuel. So there's the trucking expense to get it to the plant isn't there, because we have it right here in Central Illinois. So I think that the main buzz is trying to get off of foreign oil, gas prices, and just trying to add a value to the corn product.
Great. Well, ethanol can be made from corn. We all know that. Hans, I'm going to turn to you for just a second. I know the U of I is doing some research. You've heard of some other products out there. Help me out. There's switchgrass and another grass that works out pretty good. Tell us, can it only be made from corn, or are there other possibilities?
So, corn turns out to be actually a very mature technology. The fermentation of corn is, again, something that's been around a long time, and so, it's not surprising that we see that particular process out front. But yes, you're right. There are other substrates that can be used, and you mentioned switchgrass, but there's also research going on at the U of I looking at miscanthus, and miscanthus and switchgrass both represent dedicated energy crops. So crops that are specifically grown for corn. For producing a product like ethanol or other bioproducts. And of course, there's also the possibility of using the entire corn stalk. And so there has been a trend at looking at, can you use the stover, that right now is plowed back into the field? Can that serve as a potential source? And a lot of the research is looking at utilizing that material to produce ethanol and other biofuels.
Okay. As far as the economic benefits, is that where the hang-up is, or is it truly the end result of the fuel? Is it the purchase of the corn or the growing of the grass? What's your research showing there?
Right. So, the hang-up, as you call it, is probably the technology that's required to actually convert things like corn stalks, because that requires that we have microbes that are just a little bit different. It requires perhaps that we treat the material in such a way that the sugars are released so that the organisms can use those sugars to produce the alcohols. So it's not as simple a thing, yeast very much like to use starch, and starch is, present in corn. But when you start changing the substrate, the food that you're feeding it, to something like a corn stalk, you've got to sort of make those sugars available so that the organism can use it. And that's where the hang-up is.
Well, so it's not just cooking it. It's a lot more complicated than that.
It's treating it. It's using enzymes to break it down so that the structure is broken down into sugars that the yeast organism can actually use.
Mm-hmm. Jill, I'm going to turn to you for just a second. We're talking about using corn. Well, we've known for years that corn is a food product, either for livestock or for human consumption. If we start using all this ethanol and we start making it out of corn, is there a problem we're taking food out of people's mouths to make ethanol?
I think that's a main concern that I've heard lately. What some people don't understand is there's a byproduct from ethanol, which they call DDGs, which is dried distillers grain, and that can still be fed to livestock. And it's a very good use. It still has the protein. That is the main reason that you would feed corn to livestock. So that's still in the DDGs. And for cattle, dairy cattle, they have a very good source of protein coming out of that. And I believe that once the ethanol, all the plants get up and running and we see how much fuel is actually going to be needed, we have yields that are increasing every year, and I don't believe there's going to be a corn shortage. It may be somewhere where we have to start importing corn for this part of the state if we become hopefully one of the main ethanol producers. But Illinois is and Iowa are the two highest corn producing states. So I don't think that that's going to be a problem in the near future.
Are there other reasons than just the fact that we grow the corn here that the Corn Belt, the Midwest, is a good place to produce ethanol? Any other reasons?
Just the fact that it's not a very big metropolitan area. Not everybody wants a ethanol plant in the middle of a city. It's just the rails, the rivers are just some the way that we need to transport it. Not only the end product, but also the DDGs that we produce. The Mississippi and Illinois rivers are one of our main transporters of grain. And so we can take the ethanol and DDGs and send them down to the Gulf and export them, hopefully.
There you go. So transportation is a big
Yes.
part of this also. Well, Jim, I'm going to turn to you for just a second. I know you're in the agriculture community quite a bit. What type of buzz or what do you hear from people? Is there excitement? I know jobs are a possibility as these new plants come online. And there's also the talk of plants in this area, several of them operating on a day-to-day basis in new construction. What do you hear out in the country as you travel around?
Well, I mean, it's common knowledge in this area that at least 3 have been proposed for Champaign-Vermilion County, 3 plants. And, you know, I think the likelihood of at least one of those is great. The likelihood of all 3 probably is a stretch. But, I mean, certainly I've asked a lot of questions around because we're in real estate and we want to keep on top of it. How many of those can this area support? And some people that I've asked the question to is they can support all 3 of them. There's certainly enough corn in this area to support 3 ethanol plants. So, you know, it's just a function of the economics with the investors, and the shortage right now is actually getting them built. There's just as I understand it, just a couple of companies that are really good at that technology and can really build a nice plant, and they're obviously swamped between all the plants that are in production and getting up to speed in production. So I think there's something like 21 plants that they're trying to build over the next year, and that's got to be hard for any company to do.
Yeah, that's a lot of construction.
Yeah.
Let's put your consumer hat back on again. As you shopped for a vehicle, as our consumers are watching this program today, they're thinking, gosh, this sounds like a good idea. It's something I can help out the environment. I can use a non-foreign source to fuel my vehicle. What manufacturers are involved? What should a person look for, or what questions should they ask when they shop for a vehicle that would burn ethanol fuels?
Well, I think the way we approached it was we went to the manufacturer of the vehicle we wanted to buy, which was GM. And then at the time I bought it, it was really kind of a new technology. They didn't have a lot of them. I had to get my salespeople to really shop around. I think there were only 6 available in Illinois, Wisconsin, and Missouri, which was their marketing region at the time that I got mine. So then I found the one with the right, what the options that I wanted. But, since that time, which has been just about a year and a half ago, the production of these vehicles has exploded. So I think they're not really all that hard to find now. You just have to go in the mindset to go to ask your salesman. I don't know that they're being pushed. I think they're available for those folks that want them. I don't know if specific dealerships have a marketing plan that, hey, our goal is to sell flex fuel vehicles. But I think they're certainly available. a lot easier to find every day.
Very good. Hans, I'm going to move over to you and go back to the research side. I know the university is looking at the production of ethanol. But can you fill us in on any about the utilization? I know that the 10% or the 85% to be used in a vehicle like Jim drives. Is the university doing any research to see how those vehicles react, perform, and handle throughout their life cycle?
Right. Actually, there are a number of researchers at the U of I that are looking at utilization and specifically biologically produced alcohols and their performance characteristics in engines. Okay, so they're actually testing to see how the performance compares to, say, more traditional sources of energy. And so this is actually quite useful information because it speaks to the idea that there may be, in the pipeline, so to speak, other types of advanced fuels coming down the road, which are also produced by various fermentation processes, but have characteristics which may in fact allow for improved engine performance, even over ethanol.
The misfueling of vehicles is a big concern, I know, to many manufacturers and to consumers. So this research is very important because it's like putting diesel fuel in a gas engine or gas in a diesel engine. It's just not the right thing to do. So the research is looking at how that can be smoothed out possibly too?
Right, and the impact on the engine in the long term, because obviously engine manufacturers are concerned about the warranty on the engine, the long-term stability of the engine, and that sort of thing. And so it's really been interesting because we've had a number of companies recently that have come to the U of I and a few others that are coming, and they've been telling us that they've been running these tests as well, and so they're actually up to speed as to what their expectations are. And I think it's quite interesting because I think you will see that in the future there will be a choice, sort of a selection or a portfolio of different types of liquid fuels for particular types of applications and particular types of engines.
We may look back on these days as pretty simple as just one pump. You had to change which octane, but you just usually went with what was on sale or what was the least expensive and filled up there. Jill, as a commodity organization, is pretty obvious that, of course, you want to use the corn. What about the legislative side? What's your organization doing? Are there some hurdles to go over there? I know there's fuel taxes, there's transportation, there's incentives for building plants. What's the corn growers doing in that area?
Well, as of right now, we're working mainly on the state level with ethanol. We believe that's where we need to put our energy. This past session, we tried to pass a state mandate for 10% ethanol in every gallon. And what that would correspond to is that not every gallon would have to have 10% ethanol in it, but 10% of the total gallons we wanted to have ethanol in it. We weren't successful in that, but we hope that in the next session that we'll be able to pass something like that. But in reality, we're getting extremely close to that being what's happening already. We'd just like to see some legislation in that direction. On a national level, we have the renewable fuels standard that we passed, I believe, 2 years ago. So that was a major hurdle for us. And we would just like to see some of the taxes be trickled down to the consumer. Right now there's a credit, but it can also be held by the gas station, and it doesn't have to be passed on to the consumer. We don't have any control over that. So we'd like to see something just to make it more economical to buy ethanol, more of an incentive, and some incentives to the gas station to put E85 pumps in. We're working on a corridor up in the I-80 area, just so now that we have the vehicles and the companies are coming out with E85 flexible fuel vehicles, which we're very excited about, but we also need the pumps so that people can actually be utilizing the flexible fuel.
I think that's a good point. That's why I want to go back to slide number 1 here. I want to put those websites back up again, that now that people have heard more about the ethanol and the fuels, they can then go to these websites, illinoiscorn.org and e85fuel.com, and those are updated continuously. Who's responsible for keeping those websites updated?
Yes, well, the Illinois Corn website comes from our staff in Bloomington, and then the E85 is from NEBC, which is a national, and it can get you all the states instead of just Illinois.
Okay. Well, Jill, you're a producer. You have a farm. You consume fuel out there on the farm all the time. Are there engines that should not use a type of ethanol fuel? I know that was talked about many years ago. What do you see in practice out in your farming operation?
Actually, there's been research into e-diesel, so ethanol diesel. So we'll see if that comes down the line in the future for our tractors. But as gas engines, any 10% blend is okay for any gas engine. So we'll try to utilize that as much as possible. And then for your vehicles, you'll have to have a flex fuel vehicle for E85, and hopefully the technology will come that the fuel economy will be better in the new engines.
It's been interesting to talk to consumers that do not have a farm background. They drive through central Illinois and they see all those cornfields growing out there. But every once in a while you'll see in places in Illinois the oil pump pumping away. Wouldn't it be interesting for those consumers to see the cornfields and think of that as fuel that powers their vehicles? Hans, is that something that you think the mindset will change here in the next few years?
I think so. I mean, I think that what we've seen is really a revolution of sorts with the production of ethanol as sort of the first generation biorefinery. And having ethanol as a product is sort of that first example. But I think that in the future you're going to see corn and corn co-products here in central Illinois converted into lots of other products, maybe of even higher value. And so the potential really does exist, and I'm sure, I mean, I've heard this term, you know, that we can think of the Midwest as sort of the Saudi Arabia of corn and the potential that exists. So it really is an opportunity. It's an opportunity for researchers. You know, it's also an opportunity for consumers. And I think that, you know, the future is pretty bright in this area.
Well, it looks like with the great research that's going on at the university, and Jill, what do you think? The future is bright as far as you as a farmer and for farm organizations to promote this product?
Oh, I believe so. Adding value to your corn can only be good.
That's right. Well, it looks like it's a bright future for the ethanol industry. We'll look back on this show someday and say, wow, we were just getting started back then, and things are really going well. So on behalf of everyone watching today, I'd like to thank you three folks for being with us today. Jim, Hans, Jill, great input, and really a lot of good information about a fuel that we can use today. It's out there today. Jim, where's a couple places, how many places in Champaign County can we buy E85 fuel?
Right now, just two, Urbana and Mahomet. But you go to Bloomington Normal, there's probably 10 stations in Bloomington Normal, Gibson City, I think there's one in Danville. But I always, when I travel, I get on e85fuel.com and find out what's available to me.
There we go.
More and more every day.
Thanks a lot. And thank you for watching. We hope you'll tune in again for our next edition of Champaign County Agriculture Today.